Hello, this is Francis from McCaffrey's Crafts, and today I'm continuing on with my series about Blackthorn and Irish Faction Fighters. And in today's chat, I thought it was important to discuss the police, the popo, the boys, and see what role they played or lack of it to be true in the rise of the faction fighting. So today's just kind of an introduction into the police and generally how useless and inept they were. Again, not offering any comparisons to modern times. But anyway, in Ireland, you have to understand it was not until 1787 that any attempt was made at establishing a regular police system in Ireland. Like before that, you had like these constables, which would be like I'd say like of sorts, in that these were appointed by the local magistrates. And remember how useless the magistrates were and weren't even there. So you have the blind leading the blind in a sense. Like the magistrates are just picking out a few local lads, Protestant, of course, like they were. Say, look, you guys are the police now, and these were they were poorly paid. They were only part-time. They weren't even trained, and so basically, just to go back to this act, the 1787 act, in that year an act of parliament empowered the Lord Lieutenant to appoint a chief constable police in each or more of the baronies. Baronies is an area. Under the act, the county grand juries had the power to appoint 16 sub-constables in each of the same districts. Okay, so that's kind of what the act states. And like these kind of area or baronal constables, they were known as the baronies. They were that was the kind of the one of the first names there that was associated with the police force in olden times. And again, like some of these guys would have been relatives of the magistrates, and it was you really have to understand that law and order wasn't really done in Ireland other than through the military, the British military that were coming in, and they weren't the best type of guys at patrolling and stuff like that, and keeping the peace. So Irish people pretty much hated any form of authority and stuff like that. Like again, like the police, they had no uniforms, they had no discipline, they weren't even hardly paid. So you can imagine like how much they actually cared about when the faction fights were breaking out, or when fights were breaking out in general. They wouldn't give a flute about it. They would just do pretty much do their own thing. Like furthermore, like another act like had to be passed in Parliament then in like 1792, and this permitted the grand jury, most of them specialists actually in corruption, to appoint additional baronal constables. And this time each constable was to be paid a whopping £4 sterling a year, and they were allowed to keep proper arms, and the cost was to be raised by the baronies. So the money wasn't coming from anywhere else. Like they had to raise the money in the area to pay the police. So again, in 1796, this act was kind of like increased again in terms of the amount of people they could hire. But like, let's go back to that famous explosion of faction fighting that happened in Tipperary in 1805, which was the kind of big main one that was recorded. And this caused a chain reaction of faction fighting throughout Munster. And always remember, no matter what you hear, Munster is the focal point of faction fighting. It is the heart of it, and it's spread from Munster. So faction fighting is different from other types of fighting, and it's a Munster thing, and then it's spread throughout Ireland from then. But you see, like the military had to be called in frequently to assist whenever the local baronies, were trying to keep law and order, because they didn't have a clue. Like, and the military were hated by the country people. They're not like the military, as I said earlier, not trained in peace preservation, and they were fucking shit. Like, but anyway, going back now to remember the guy Peeler I introduced, Peel, before in one of the earlier videos. Well, it was in 18 14, that's 1814, that the Irish police was formalised and set up as what was known as the Police Preservation Force by Robert Peel. And that's actually where the term peeler comes from. You might have heard, like, there's loads of nicknames for coppers over the years. Some of them not too nice, but it's like that's where the name peeler came from, because Robert Peel set up the police force. But like, actually, well, in Dublin being a city, like, they actually did have a kind of what was called a Dublin Metropolitan Police Force, which was like in 1786. So they did have some kind of police force there, but outside of Dublin, not really, other than what I've said so far. So look, let me just go through this 1814 Act. This authorised the setting up of the Peace Preservation Force, and this was empowered by the Lord Lieutenant to proclaim any city or county or any part of that county to be in a state of disturbance. So this means basically, if they said, right, this area is out of order, it's disturbances here, so you need to do something, and if this allowed them the power to appoint a chief magistrate, a chief constable, and 50 sub-constables into it. So that would be quite a lot compared to what they were used to. The chief constable magistrate appointed, whoever that he wanted, of course. But again, it is the kind of setting up of a more kind of formalized type of police force. Now, the Peace Preservation Force was used in what they call disturbed districts, and only under the magistrate, and they became like the terror of the countryside. They could do whatever they want. They could beat up whoever they want. They could, they were a law unto themselves. Like, give a few these guys power, and you can imagine like the kind of, what they used to do and what they used to get up to, and how hated they would have been. So even the extent of this hatred is documented in that guy's book, Galen Broker, in a book called Rural Disorder and Police Reform in Ireland in 1812 to 1836. And that's, what he said in his book is that, when the military was called in, then they were very worried it was going to start up quite a big revolt as well in the area. So I think we'll leave it at that today, and I'll kind of introduce more about the role of the police. And just a kind of summary again there, that the police force was just set up. There wasn't really a police force. They were very disorganized, and this fostered and allowed the faction fighting to spread throughout, because they didn't really care about policing over it, because they weren't even paid and stuff. So anyway, look, I'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching.